Hello everybody and welcome to a very special edition of Spill the Tea Tutor Talks. As you can see, we are joined by someone rather special who you may already know. It's the wonderful Julia, and you may be wondering, what are we talking about? Well, I'll give you a big hint. It's this gorgeous book that she's got behind her. And we're going to be in conversation with Julia today to talk about some fantastic observations and notes that she's made in her stories, in her case studies, in these lovely manuals, something that you can write down and refer to, and it'll be a lifelong companion through your tutoring. But enough from me. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself to all of our lovely listeners and viewers today?
Thanks, Susie. Thank you so much. So my name is Julia Silva. I'm a former school leader. I'm a mum of 5. I was a lonely tutor. And 4 years ago, I created Qualified Tutor to provide support and development in the tutoring profession. And along the way, I learned a lot. I learned what's similar and what's different between teaching and tutoring. I developed some courses that would focus specifically on, if you haven't had teacher training, this is what you need to know as a tutor. And then we went further than that, and we actually sort of began to really articulate what the pedagogy of tutoring is, and how it dovetails with teaching. So I'm really, really passionate about making sure that tutors and teachers work in partnership together, of course, with the family and with the child themselves, the student themselves. And just making sure that the tutors themselves get the support, the well-being, the recognition for what they participate. I mean, we know from the Sutton Trust study recently that 1 in 3, I think it is, young people have worked with a tutor, which means that we are very much part of the educational ecosystem, but not necessarily traditionally very well recognized or understood. And for me, all of that is underpinned by trust. So in this conversation that we have today, the word trust will come up again and again. Tutors traditionally are not a trusted member of the education workforce, and building up those structures around trust is very much what the young person needs for the learning to really go where it needs to go.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Julia. Well, to kick us off, I'm going to go straight into these juicy questions that we've got in front of us here, and we're ready with our cups of tea. So to begin with, in your wonderful book, which we'll be linking throughout and sharing throughout this lovely episode, you emphasise the importance of building that strong rapport with students. Immediately, I know trust is going to come up, like you say. So for anybody who's new or is established but really wants to kind of, focus in on that, what are some of those practical ways that tutors can develop trust and connection when working with new students?
Absolutely.
Just really, get on that. Yeah.
So there are 2 strands to my answer for you, Susie. One is about the teaching and learning context, and the other starts much, much sooner, much earlier than that, because really a person who leaves the classroom or develops their tutoring alongside their teaching needs to think of their tutoring as a business, as a small business, minimally as a freelancer, but really as developing yourself as a self-employed person. And therefore, your signals of who I am, where I'm coming from, what you can expect from me as my client has to be communicated from the very start. You need to come across as a professional. And there are lots of ways, and we're going to discuss them in this conversation, about how to jumpstart that trustful relationship before the parent even gets in touch with you. But then once that conversation starts with a parent, there's a lot of listening that has to happen. There's a lot of awareness, of sharing of your expertise with generosity. And you wouldn't believe, I've spoken with some tutors who are not excited to talk about the young person. And for me, that's a deal breaker. As a mom, I would not be interested in working with a tutor who didn't seem fascinated by my young person, right? Because you and I know every child is a world, and if you're not willing as a tutor to peer into that world, then you're not in the right job. So let's stay in the positive. Let's say you need to make it clear that you are interested in the young person and that you're able to take them where they need to go. So let's unpick that for a second. So the subtitle of my book is Be the Tutor Your Student Needs, which is a really, really powerful message about being student-centered, and about making yourself responsive to what you're reading in the student constantly. And that's really where the trust comes from. When you signal that you are committed and able to take the young person where they need to go in their learning, you become trustworthy. And everything that comes after that is merely strategy. But your culture needs to be very, very clearly, I will be the person that this young person needs. And if I'm not that person, I will find them a person who is. Yeah. So one of the most trustworthy things a tutor will do is signpost and refer a young person on if they are not the right person. And if you are, it's all about slowing down, taking the time, asking the questions, building relationship, and really giving the young person exactly what they need to thrive. So there isn't really one answer. It's an answer that's based on that commitment that's coming from your why, that's going directly to the service of that young person. It is, as we'll see in this conversation, a really precise approach. Tutoring is far more precise than classroom teaching is necessarily. And therefore, as we'll see again and again, much of the friction that happens in the tutoring, in the teaching context, doesn't happen in tutoring, because you're much more focused on supporting each young person, going to where they are and moving them forward from there. That's it's a lot. No, it's a lot, but it's a mindset.
Oh, I mean, I feel so at ease, and it's just so lovely speaking to you, Julia. And I think this is mini tangent, but for anyone who buys Julia's book, it's, you can hear your voice throughout. And I know that might sound a bit peculiar, but you can hear that passion and, you know, that meaningful connection that you're making with the tutor who's reading that book, in a similar way to kind of mirror what you're just saying there, which is you've really got to connect with the students that you're working with. And it's so true, like you say, the parent wants you to be so invested in what's going on in their little person's world. You know, like you say, they're there, they're here for whatever reason, and you've got to be part of that, because you're going to make such an impact. And like you say, I think that's such a good way to frame it, which is, if you don't think you're quite vibing, you're quite the right puzzle piece for that family, if you're recommending a fellow professional, gosh, like you say, that's such a good thing to do, because it saves so much more heartache and future, you know, problems that could bubble up, which I think is sometimes a misstep that some tutors do, don't they? They'll sort of push through and think, no, I can do it, or no, I'm going to do this, but lead to a little bit of discord.
It's a really interesting tension that tutors have between their business head and their educator head. But as we're going to talk about again and again, those two things have to be aligned as a tutor. There's no such thing as taking work that you can't deliver on. And equally, there's no such thing as working in a way that doesn't suit your business needs. You know, you have to charge for every session, and you have to charge a viable amount, because we're looking for careers that are successful and sustainable. And that takes a little bit of thinking through.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Julia. Well, I think that takes us nicely on to our second question, which is that fostering a love of learning, which so many educators will hear all the time. However, what I'm interested in is that balance then about that academic rigor that, you know, some parents and families are looking for, alongside that joyful learning experience that, you know, so many tutors want to deliver, and, as you say before, build that trust, build that harmony between yourself and your clients. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I promise you that any qualified tutor member who is listening to this podcast knows what I'm about to say. It's a false dichotomy. That the pleasure of learning is what we want to inspire. We don't want to distract children with extrinsic motivations. Effective learning, rigorous learning is pleasurable when it's measured, when it's paced and pitched effectively for the young person. When it really serves the young person's goals, the energy rises and we feel motivated simply by being successful. So this relationship between motivation and achievement. You know, we need to build quick wins in for our young people. We need to help them to feel good about their work. We need to shower them with feedback, and the majority of that feedback should be pointing out what they've done well. And that's the way that we create a context that is suitable and designed to really build a culture of learning that is joyful. So what I didn't tell you was got comic poetry behind me, because that's irrelevant. Again, those are strategies, yeah, and they are only suitable for a certain type of student at a certain time. The whole concept of being the tutor your student needs means that they will feel the pleasure of progress that you make with them. And what you mustn't do is distract from those things. Having said that, you need them to keep coming back, right? So you do need to make sure that the session is enjoyable for them. With my little ones, I would give them biscuits.
Always
I have to tell you, one morning worked with a tutor who gave them a can of Coke, and I was not at all impressed with that. But you know, unicorn stickers if you're working online, and a biscuit and a glass of squash if you're working in person, just sweetens the deal. It's just with older children. One of the things that I like to talk about, see, I did get practical here. One of the things that I like to talk about is be fun and be friendly. So I speak with lots of tutors who are so nervous about wasting time in a session. They don't think they're supposed to stop and say hi. They don't think that it's legitimate to bring some fun activities into a session. But anybody who is experienced knows you've got to keep the energy up. So a little bit of banter, a little bit of open, you know, sharing who you are, what's going on with you, what's going on with the young person, which is, of course, building the relationship. But it's also just, you know, greasing the motor.
Yeah.
Basically making it all flow better. So when we do training with tutors, we like to ask them to plan a fun 5-minute activity, and I make it really clear to them not to apologize for doing something fun. There's tons of ways for you to build retrieval practice, you know, lots of different ways of getting the brain warmed up at the same time as getting the young person pumped and energized. I could go on all day.
It's so true, and it's very endearing to hear that from, you know, an expert in the field and someone with, you know, your fabulous professional standing, Julia. So, you know, this is why it's so great to spill the tea. But I think especially so when working with older students, like you say, it is a little fear. It's like kind of pecking away in a tutor's head. But when I've worked with tutors who've worked with like college students and things like that, or high school students, I always think back to, I have some friends who work in higher education, and they would say, even when they're working with adults, they would do like an introductory game, similar to how you're saying, you know, when you're working with tutors, like build this activity. Because as an adult, if you were just thrusted into something, you'd be a bit like, oh, you know, like, oh, my brain's not on, or I'm distracted by something. And that's the same with young people, isn't it? They're processing everything, they're picking up signals and vibes, and if they just feel that little bit more relaxed, at ease, you know, they have a moment, they feel it's a human to human connection.
I think that's so helpful. Preparing something for ADHD awareness month, and so I was paying attention to the idea of transitions and how I got myself a diagnosis in ADHD recently, which you know, it's a funny thing to sit with, but transitions are difficult, and dropping into a session does take a moment, and anything that you can do to ease those transitions is certainly kind. I really feel like it's worth, you know, being clear that a tutor needs to be really, really clear about their expectations and the young person's expectations. And that's where all the success comes from. It's where the pleasure comes from. It's where the progress comes from. It all starts with that sense of clarity and really serving the student's needs.
I love that. I think that's so fantastic. And it's such an interesting point how you were saying before, though, like you'd sprinkle in the biscuit, yeah, the little sticker, but like you say, enjoy that learning journey. Like you say, you want it to be that, oh, you know, they're so excited to have their session, you know, with you the next time.
That's right.
Isn't it? Yeah.
You see it in the difference between newly qualified teachers and experienced teachers. The distractions drop away over the years as you become more confident. You don't need sticker charts anymore. So I wouldn't tell a new teacher not to use a sticker chart with their Key Stage 1 young people, but I wouldn't do it myself. I think about, you know, when you learn to drive a car and the conscious competence. And then eventually you get to that point of unconscious competence where it just becomes effortless. So I sometimes coach new tutors who get very frustrated that the student is doodling. And I say to them, but are they engaging? Have they delivered? Are you making progress? So what does the doodling matter? You know, if you can't be in a one-to-one context, if you can't choose what to turn a blind eye to, then you're really, you know, there's some work to be done, really.
No, again, that's another really important point there that I think it can creep into people's minds, like you say.
You know, I'll tell you something lovely. So I just did a session recently for educators community in the States, and I did rubber ducking with them. So, you know, rubber ducking is the it's a coder's practice of talking their problems through with the duck rather than disturbing the other coder down the corridor, because once you articulate it, you hear. So it's very similar to teachers think alouds. And what really came out in this conversation was you can't really think aloud in the classroom. 30 children can't be encouraged to talk to their rubber duck. In a tutoring context, of course, that's a no-brainer. So we have more strategies up our sleeve, and actually we have less rules to follow, which means that we can really personalize the learning.
I love this. Oh, Julia, we could easily harp on about this. We've got so many good questions to go through, but oh, absolutely. No, it's so true. Well, my next question sort of pivots slightly onto a different topic, related but slightly different. So tutoring, sometimes people say, you know, it can blend that personal and professional. I know you've mentioned, you know, you've got your businessy hat, but then your tutoring hat. So what would you say for someone who's looking to maintain some sort of like boundaries, who still wants to strike the professional business-like but empathetic and personal sort of balance?
It's such a healthy question, and clearly coming from a lot of experience. I talk with Qualified Tutor members all day long, and some of them leave their WhatsApp and their emails open, and they want to have a free flow of communication with students. And some of them are very, very specific about how and when to communicate with them. And I think the first answer is you have to find what works for you, right? In the same way that we have some tutors who have young kids at home and are therefore working very specific hours when their kids are, you know, sorted. You'll have close to retirement tutors who have all the time in the world for you and your mum. They're there for you and everything in between. And that's very much a part of identifying your persona as a tutor. And I think it's interesting to remember that just as when you're a teacher in the classroom, you do have a persona. So a tutor persona that you develop. And as long as you're really intentional about what that looks like, and give yourself the freedom to start with your own why and really understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to serve. So, you know, a group tutor, a tutor who tends to do online groups will tend to be less involved personally with families than, for example, an alternative provision tutor. So yesterday I met with a tutor who had her young person in the car with her because she works with her full time, because that's what the alternative provision funding allows. And this young person is helping her move house this week. Yes. And yet it's important to note that that tutor is really, really wise and very mindful about what the boundaries are. She just the proximity is important with that student because that student needs to really focus on her well-being. Whereas if you're doing biology GCSE with a group of 8 or 12 young people in an online room, your boundaries will be far less challenged. You'll have more distance. Having said all of that, there are some important rules. And what I've done is, in my book, in workshop 1, I talk about the 7 P's of professionalism, which was just, and since I created it, we've come up with a lot more P's. You'll see what they do when you put them together. So punctuality, preparedness, positivity, politeness, persistence, and there's always one. But what happens when you are polite is you create a respectful boundary between, you are more polite to the person in Tesco's than you are to your spouse. I am. And that's because of punctuality. So politeness, yes, the punctuality and the preparedness sets your stall out as a professional. So you're not, you can still be the girl next door tutor, but you will do so in a way that sets out your intention and puts you in a role. Yeah. So, and then the patience and the positivity and all of those things create that element of, I'm here for you. This is your hour. I'm here for you. And then finally, the persistence, which I should have said right at the beginning, the persistence is really where trust happens. The persistence that I will continue to show up for you, even when you're struggling, even if you're having a bad day, even if I'm having a bad day, I will continue for you, is the sort of person-centered professionalism that we're looking for. So to sum up, what I've told you is really the whole thing is about understanding who you are, where you're coming from, and then building business practices that match those needs, always being mindful of the fact that you've put yourself in the role of a professional, and therefore wherever you choose your boundaries to be, they must be somewhere.
I love the way that you frame that, Julia. And, you know, the way you break it down, and as I say, for, you know, for anyone who buys the book, and again, I really implore you that you do that. But it's like also getting the advice from a very close friend, and that's sort of kind of what you need, because it is so personal. The thing that we're talking about, like you say, is so personalized.
I think you know, tutors are aware that we need regulation, and we'll talk about that in a second when we come to safeguarding. But whatever happens to regulate tutoring, whatever standards we build out to suit tutoring, they have to lend themselves to flexibility, because we're not doing our job if we're not personalizing, and personalizing not just to the young person, but actually also to ourselves. Yes, this is how I want to work. This is who I want to serve. And that alignment is where the magic lies in tutoring. So in the book, I talk about being safe, skilled, and supported. And those are very, very open concepts intentionally, because whereas we are used to in school, you know, we were all raised in schools and many of us worked in schools, we are used to colouring inside the lines, right? We're used to this space of compliance, and we're rewarded for compliance. You won't be rewarded as a tutor for compliance. Yeah, you need to go and draw your own picture and let the child colour it in for you. So there's a lot of independence, which is overwhelming, which is where the support piece comes in.
Like, as you've said there about regulations, this kind of leads us on to slightly more, you could say, heavy question, but a pertinent one, which is safeguarding. And I love this chapter. I think it's so important. And you know, thank you so much for writing on this topic and doing so. It was a great one to read and go back over, because you highlight, as you know, as any educator would want to do, is creating that safe environment. And that's something that we hear a lot as tutors, or, you know, if you also work in tandem in education. But for tutors, what would you say are some of the sort of key takeaways, the key practices?
I actually have a very specific answer for you. So we've done a lot of thinking about this over the years. You know, when I first contacted the NSPCC about safeguarding for tutors, they'd never thought of it. There genuinely was a new question. It was during COVID, and they had resources for music teachers and resources for PE teachers and resources for volunteers on everything about tutor. Now, we've come a long way. I think it's worth pointing out what the driver is. So, of course, we had COVID that accelerated the progress of the tutoring profession, but it's online tutoring that's really made the difference. Now, online tutoring means that I can find a tutor for my young person anywhere in the world. It's awesome. It means that tutoring might become affordable for me if it wasn't otherwise.
Yeah.
And yet it means that any stranger anywhere in the world can get face-to-face time with my young person. At Qualified Tutor, our solution to this is certification. So we've created a 5-point check, and I'm going to go through it with you because for me, having your ducks in a row
Oh, yes.
makes an enormous difference. I learned a lot about that in school leadership, that really the best course I ever did was the NSPCC Safer Recruitment course, because of the way that it changed my mindset.
Yeah.
So our certification process is designed to do the same. So we're looking for enhanced DBS on the update service. And then we add an additional service where we check their DBS daily. We check the DBS of every qualified tutor member who is made visible to tutors. So we have a directory of members. We check it daily because if somebody is working, basically, how do you scale an online education service without doing that? So daily DBS for the update service. Then we've got safeguarding training, of course. And what I cover in the book is what I call the 3 R's. So recognize, respond, and report. And most of that information is taken directly from the NSPCC because it has to be locked in to the legislation. There's no wiggle room on a chapter on safeguarding, is there?
Of course, no.
And yet, and I really appreciated that you said this last time we chatted, handling the information sensitively becomes even more important when you're working with tutors, because some of them, it's the first time they've heard this information. And we all know that the first time you go to a safeguarding training, you come out hyper vigilant and really stressed afterwards. Yes.
Yeah.
And so for me, handling the material sensitively and actually giving trigger warnings and actually saying to the tutors, please be mindful of your own well-being whilst you're covering this material is really, really helpful in the context of safeguarding. Okay, so daily DBS on the update service, safeguarding training, insurance. So we ask certified members to have personal and professional, in personal liability, professional indemnity, or the other way around. And the reason for that is they need to know that they are, it's that piece around professionalism. They will never need to use that insurance, but the fact that they have it and the fact that they can share with the parents that they have it is a specific level of seriousness. So you've heard me say lots of times, tutoring is not plan B.
Yes.
Okay. Plan A tutors get insurance. Yeah. Okay. Then I'm looking for terms and conditions. And the reason why we look for terms and conditions, and that includes GDPR, it includes safeguarding policy, and it includes how you're going to work with me, what my expectations are, what my cancellation fees are. Once you put all of those things down and articulate them, the clarity that you create, actually, it tends to be an upstream solution, right? People don't test you on your cancellation policy.
Yes.
But tutor that sends it out during onboarding.
100%. Yeah.
And please know, I'm not talking about being overly formal.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about a world where online has caused us to be really intentional about how we build our trust language. And terms and conditions is just part of that. We talk about verified client reviews. And key there is the word verified. But in order to be able to recommend a tutor, you need some verified client reviews. You need to know that they've got a good track record. And how do you jumpstart that track record? Well, then you might well want to tutor your mum. But but why did I use the 5-point check as an answer to how to create safe spaces for young people? And actually, it's all part of this big picture of being a trusted adult. And it starts long before you actually get the client. It starts, and it persists way beyond when they get their GCSE results. It's actually who you are as a person, and it's your approach to the role of tutoring, which is why I'm so passionate about it, because of course the change that we can make as tutors is immense. But to continue to be able to make those changes and to mitigate the risks against making those changes, we need to get our heads straight. Conversations with tutors about this every day, and we are learning to be proactive, and that's really, really helpful. We can't wait for parents to ask us. And actually, if you think about the old school tutoring world, where it was really about privilege and about helping, creating a glass ceiling for those top students, well, it was all sort of cushioned in money and privilege. And in order to create a model of tutoring that is accessible and affordable, we need to start building some of these structures in. And we can't afford not to, because our young people need the support. Student needs was my publisher's preferred subtitle.
Right, okay.
But the one that I wanted to go with was find your element and fly as a tutor. I know. And he was right. He was definitely right, because we have to keep the student in the middle. But me, because I've seen all these awesome tutors grow in confidence over the years, and each one goes in their own direct direction, but each one flourishes, it becomes so rewarding to really to see how an educator can repurpose their skills and find gentle ways to deliver learning and protect their own well-being and work in ways that don't compromise their integrity or their confidence or all that, and I certainly, and everybody who is working in schools is doing an immense service for society. But that lovely phrase that you used last time we spoke, the education adjacent professionals, a lot of work to do. We really, really need to help. We need to find the ways that we thrive so that we are well, so that we can take care of the young people around us.
Oh, I love the final element. Oh, that's so inspiring. Everybody has their own special element. It's like, oh, it's me. Kind of
have you seen Ken Robinson's work on the element? With you, I actually quoted Ken Robinson at the beginning of the book. Where's that lovely quote? Obviously it's hiding. So he says so Ken Robinson is the well-known educationalist who unfortunately died during COVID, and is just an awesome human. So he says, the fact is that given the challenges we face, education doesn't need to be reformed, it needs to be transformed. The key to this transformation is not to standardize education, but to personalize it, to build achievement on discovering the individual talents of each child, to put students in an environment where they want to learn and where they can naturally discover their true passions. There's only one word that's wrong in that, my lovely, and that's the word child. Because it's actually every person. And you are just as valuable as the young person that you're supporting. And when we know that, then we'll really, really be thriving.
Oh, Julia, oh my goodness. What an inspirational and lovely conversation we've had today. I have to say, we're so incredibly grateful for your time today and spilling the tea with us on all of these interesting topics and important conversations. And I really do, I've said it quite a few times, but I think anyone who's listened today, it's like talking to a very, very wise friend, which is the lovely way that you have about you, Julia, which is why you're so nice to talk to. But we'll be putting all the links in and all the necessary information so everybody knows where to get it. And I hope that everybody else feels just as inspired as I do. I love that, find your element. I'm really going to keep on saying that now. But thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Susie. It's such a joy. Thank you.